The stranger in the mirror! The bathroom was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Jacob wiped the fogged-up mirror with a towel, revealing his weary face. The long days and sleepless nights had etched lines into his features, and his eyes, once bright, were now dull with exhaustion. As he stared into the mirror, a strange sensation washed over him. Something was off. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light or his overactive imagination. But as he turned to rinse his face, he caught something out of the corner of his eye. His reflection hadn't moved. It still stared straight ahead, its gaze unblinking and unnerving. Jacob froze. He turned back slowly, his breath caught in his throat. His reflection matched his movements now, perfectly synchronized. He chuckled nervously, the sound hollow in the empty room. "Just tired," he muttered, like trying to convince himself. He left the bathroom without looking back at the mirror, but the image of that frozen reflection lingered in his mind. The next morning, Jacob avoided the mirror entirely as he got ready for work. The events of the previous night felt distant, like a bad dream, but every time he passed by a reflective surface, his chest tightened. He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him. At work, he kept himself busy, like focusing on the endless stream of emails and tasks that piled up on his desk. But even in the fluorescent-lit office, the memory of the mirror nagged at him. When he glanced at his computer screen, he thought he saw something unusual in his reflection, an expression that didn't belong to him. He blinked, and it was gone. "Get a grip, Jacob," he whispered to himself, running a hand through his unkempt hair. That evening, the unease grew. As Jacob sat in his dimly lit living room, he couldn't ignore the pull of the hallway mirror. It was as if it were calling to him, daring him to look. He tried to distract himself with the TV, but the static hum of the mirror's presence was deafening. Finally, he couldn't resist. He approached the mirror cautiously, his reflection appearing as it always did, tired and gaunt. But as he leaned in closer, inspecting his features, his reflection's lips curved into a faint smirk. Jacob stumbled back, his heart pounding. His reflection returned to its neutral expression, moving in perfect sync with him as if nothing had happened. No, I'm imagining things," he whispered. But deep down, he knew he wasn't. Over the following days, the incidents escalated. The reflection no longer mimicked him perfectly. Sometimes it was a split-second delay. Other times, it would move entirely on its own, adjusting its posture or glancing over its shoulder while Jacob stood frozen. He stopped using the bathroom mirror, covering it with a towel, and avoided looking at windows or his phone screen. But the reflection found him regardless. In his dreams, in fleeting glimpses in puddles or shop windows, it was always there, watching. One night, as he sat at his kitchen table, Jacob decided he had to confront it. He couldn't live in fear anymore. He uncovered the hallway mirror, his reflection staring back at him. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice trembling. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, to his horror, the reflection blinked, slowly, deliberately, before tilting its head and smiling. "I've been waiting for you," it said. Jacob's knees buckled, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. The voice wasn't his own, though it sounded like it had come from inside his head. "You're not real," he whispered. The reflection's smile widened. "Oh, I'm very real, Jacob, and I've been here for a long time. You just haven't been paying attention." The next morning, Jacob packed a bag and drove to a small cabin he had rented in the woods. No mirrors, no reflective surfaces, just isolation. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of peace. He spent the days hiking through the dense forest, letting the crisp air and rustling leaves distract him from the nightmare he had left behind. But the peace was short-lived. One night, as he sat by the fireplace, a faint tapping sound broke the silence. It was coming from the cabin's only window. Jacob's blood ran cold as he turned to look. The glass was fogged up from the cold night air, but he could just make out the outline of a face, his own face. Panicking, Jacob grabbed the nearest object, a heavy poker from the fireplace, and rushed to the window. He wiped away the fog with his sleeve, but there was nothing there, just the dark forest beyond. He stepped back, his heart racing when he heard the voice again. "You can't run, Jacob. You belong to me." The following days blurred together in a haze of fear and paranoia. Every reflective surface became a threat, every shadow a potential danger. Jacob slept in fits, plagued by nightmares of being pulled into the mirror, his reflection's cold hands dragging him into an endless void. He began to suspect that the reflection wasn't just mimicking him, it was learning him, his movements, his thoughts, his fears. It wanted something from him, and he was terrified to find out what. On the 7th night in the cabin, Jacob awoke to find himself standing in front of the window, his hand pressed against the glass. He didn't remember getting out of bed. His reflection stared back at him, its eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "It's time," the reflection said, its voice a chilling whisper. Jacob tried to move, to scream, but his body wouldn't obey. Jacob tried to move, to scream, but his body wouldn't obey. It was as though invisible strings had bound him, forcing him to stand there, face to face with his reflection. The cold seeped into his fingertips as they remained pressed against the glass, and for a moment the reflection seemed almost compassionate. But then its smile returned, a cruel, knowing twist of the lips. "You've kept me locked away long enough," it said. "I've waited years for this moment." Jacob's heart thundered in his chest. "What are you? What do you want from me?" He finally managed to whisper, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his pulse. The reflection tilted its head. "I'm the piece of you you've tried to bury. The anger, the fear, the chaos. You thought you could keep me hidden, but darkness doesn't disappear, it waits. And now, I'm taking what's mine." Jacob felt his hand being pulled closer to the glass, as if an unseen force was drawing him in. He fought back, his muscles trembling with effort, but the pull was relentless. The glass seemed to ripple like water under his touch, and he could feel the cold wetness against his skin. "Stop! Please, I'll do anything," Jacob begged, his voice cracking. But the reflection only laughed, a hollow, menacing sound. "Anything? It's too late for bargains. You made your choice long ago, Jacob. Now live with it. Or rather, let me live in your place." The last thing Jacob saw before the world went black was his reflection's hand emerging from the glass, gripping his wrist with icy, vice-like strength. When Jacob awoke, everything felt wrong. The air in the room was thick, and the colors around him seemed muted, as if he were looking through a fogged lens. He stumbled toward the window and froze. The man staring back at him wasn't him. It was his reflection, now alive and free, standing outside the glass and looking in. "No," Jacob whispered, reaching up to touch the glass, but it was solid. On the other side, the reflection smirked, raised a hand in farewell, and walked away, disappearing into the forest. Jacob screamed, pounding on the glass, but no one heard him. He was trapped, left to haunt the reflective prison his reflection had escaped from. From that day forward, people in the small mountain town would sometimes catch glimpses of a gaunt, haunted face in mirrors and windows, a fleeting image of a man with desperate eyes, silently screaming for help. But by the time they looked again, it was always gone. And somewhere far away, a man wearing Jacob's face was living a new life, free from shadows and regret, while the real Jacob remained forever locked in the cold, silent void of his reflection.